How loud is too loud, and what exactly happens to the body during hearing loss? I recently had a chance to talk to audiologist Dr. Gnewikow about some specific causes, prevention, and protection of our little ones' ears. Take a look.
Noise exposure is probably one of the major causes of hearing loss. It's like 12% of all children, 17% of all adults in America have some degree of hearing loss related to noise. Basically, to understand it, you have to know a little bit about the anatomy. If you look at this chart here, this is a chart of the ear, outer ear, middle ear, inner ear. But if you could look down microscopically into the cochlea or the inner ear, you have these little nerve endings that have little cilia, little hairs on them. And what happens is when you're overexposed, these little hair cells are destroyed. Originally, I don't think really understood all of the issues, but by doing studies on guinea pigs and exposing the high levels of noise and then looking at the ear microscopically, we could see that these nerve endings were damaged. What happens in a normal ear is you're exposed to high levels of noise and you get a temporary change in your hearing. We call it a temporary threshold shift. And then gradually it comes back. So if someone shot a gun very close to you and damaged your ear, you might go for several hours saying, I can't hear anything.
Right.
And then little by little it starts to come back. But the problem is if you continue to expose yourself to these high levels of noise, it comes back less and less, and then we call that a permanent threshold shift.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, let's talk about prevention. We don't want to have your hearing loss. What should we be doing?
Well, the best thing you can do is not overexpose yourself to high levels of noise. The federal government has got some fairly stringent restrictions through an agency called the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, where they will go to industrial sites and they will monitor the noise levels and tell them when they need protection and when they need to get their hearing checked and so forth and so on. So in industry, it's pretty well taken care of. But once you get out of industry, your ear doesn't know if the noise came from a loom in a textile mill or if it came from your lawnmower. So when you're at home, you need to use hearing protection. The little roll-up earplugs work pretty well. Ear muffs, actually I've got a set up here. I should have had them down.
Oh, nice.
These are probably the best. You simply put them over the ear. They're easy to keep up with. You can hang them on a nail in your garage. So when you crank up your chainsaw or you go out to shoot your gun, you put those on. So try to minimize the levels coming to your ear, and by reducing that with hearing protection, you can pretty well take care of yourself in most situations. Of course, sometimes you have issues with children where you can't deal with it as well. So if you've got a really little kid, I would be very reluctant to give young children earphones on their iPod, not unless you were monitoring them very carefully, because sometimes if you get the sound too loud, you can actually do damage, and we don't want damage in adults, but we really don't want the damage in children. Wearing iPods or earphones within themselves is not normally an issue. It's only an issue when you overdrive that signal in the ear.
Now, how do you monitor that then? Do you put the heads-up phones on first and set the volume? And if that's okay with you, is it okay with them? Or do they hear better than we do? And I thought they did.
That's a really good question, and I think that would probably be the simplest way to do it. If you can put the iPod in your ear and you are comfortable. On the other hand, if it's music and it's with certain notes on the music or certain people's voices, you tend to cringe a little bit. That means you're probably getting up at the point where it could be potentially damaging. But I think it's a good idea for a parent to monitor it. And if then there's a way to set the iPod so it's always at that level, then I think that would be helpful.
And I'm going to call out my 17-year-old daughter out there. She puts her earbuds in, and we're in the car, and I can hear it from the front seat. Is that too loud?
That's probably too loud. Generally speaking, any noise that is loud enough that you have to raise your voice to communicate over the noise is potentially damaging. Now, generally, for short periods of time, it's not going to be a big issue, but over long periods of time, it can be. The higher the intensity of the sound, the shorter the duration that you can allow yourself to have. If it's a very loud sound, like a high-powered rifle going off, one shot may damage your hearing permanently. On the other hand, if you're running your lawnmower, probably not wearing earplugs every time is not going to be an issue, but over long term it would be.
So then let's then transition into, okay, you have this hearing loss and it doesn't go away.
Right.
What do you do then?
Well, the first thing you do is you have your hearing evaluated medically and by an audiologist to determine if you have permanent nerve damage. And generally the loss from noise is a permanent condition. Hearing aids do help those individuals, but you don't want to just try to make them better. You want to try to counsel them to the extent that they try to not do it to a further degree. A lot of hearing loss that might be hereditary, or where people have had other medical issues with their ears, their system may be weakened a little bit, and so that noise might actually do more damage to them than others.
And Audiology Hearing Aid Associates has 2 area locations, one on Langhorne Road in Lynchburg, 434-528-4245. The other location's on Main Street in Danville. Their phone number is 434-799-6288. And to find out more about them in general, you can go to digitalhearing4u.com.